Good evening. My name is Lewis Powell. It's my pleasure to come before you once again on behalf of the Cook County Bar Association, the world's oldest African American Bar Association, established in 1914 by a group of lawyers in the Chicago metropolitan area. And it's our duty, it's our pleasure to come before you to try to just bring information that the citizens can use. Today we have a very distinguished attorney, an attorney who's on the rise, a young attorney by the name of Amir Akbar. Brother Akbar, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Mr. Powell, thank you for having me. I practice in the area of personal injury and wrongful death and civil rights. I'm with the firm of Karchmar and Lambert.
Okay, that's a nice law firm. You all just had a pretty nice, significant case a couple of years ago. Is that right?
Yes, yes. As you know, we litigated Sandra Bland, the case where the woman was unfortunately stopped in Texas, jailed, and then eventually committed suicide, according to official reports. We were able to settle that matter on behalf of her family for $1.9 million, and more importantly, enact some reforms in the Texas legal system.
Marvelous job, Attorney Akbar. Ladies and gentlemen, today's topic will be the Van Dyke verdict, part 2. So we had your senior partner with us last week, and he ran out of time, so we thought it'd be a marvelous idea to bring you back, to pick up on it, and hopefully we can get the audience engaged. The number is 312-738-1060. 312-738-1060. Just a couple of basic questions. Attorney Akbar, what should a citizen do when they're stopped by a police officer?
In relation to the Van Dyke situation, that situation, I'll say it this way, is sort of a unique situation, and I'm not sure what Laquan could have done differently in that situation to provoke a different response. But the Cook County Bar Association, we've teamed up with Noble, National Order of Black Law Enforcement, to develop a system, an acronym that people can use in the course of police interactions, especially in traffic stops. And it's called How To. The H would be put your hands on the steering wheel, just so that later on it can't be claimed that you were a threat or you were reaching for some dangerous object. O, open your windows. You want to make sure that your windows are open so the officer can see the inside of the vehicle. W is windows. Make sure your windows are rolled down so he has clear visibility. 2, you want to make sure you turn off your car and leave your keys on the dash so that the officer can see that you're not a flight risk. You're not going to drive away as he approaches. The theme of this is basically just to make sure that you're not presenting a threat, and that even if it's unreasonable, no officer can claim that you're a threat.
Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you appreciate this. Is some basic information, because this will prevent an accident from happening. Correct, Attorney Akbar? Hopefully, because we do know, excuse me, these last couple of years we've seen an escalation, unfortunately, of senseless violence on behalf of police officers. Now again, we're not attacking police officers, but this is supposed to be a balance in terms of police officers doing their job, citizens feeling protected by the police force, and just basically just common sense, common decency. Let's give a couple hypotheticals. What if Laquan did not have a weapon and he disobeyed the order to stop? What option would the police have?
In that situation, in any situation, any police encounter, they still have to evaluate the suspect and whether or not it's a fair decision to use force. And once they do decide that force is necessary, it's a question of how much force is appropriate in a particular situation. In this situation, Laquan was armed with a knife, but you have to consider the fact that he was some distance away. There are a number of different factors that an officer is required to consider when they're evaluating how much of a threat a person is, and accordingly, how much force is necessary.
Well, is it a judgment call?
It is a judgment call. I mean, that's clear. I mean, there are a lot of different variables. Is it dark? Is the person have something in their hands? Do you know what they have in their hands? How far away are you? Has this person injured somebody else? There are a lot of different variables that go into it. To be honest, it may not always be entirely clear as it was in this situation, where you have somebody who's at a distance from the officer who eventually fired shots at him.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to make sure this is not attacking anybody. We're not, we call Monday morning quarterbacking, because we realize a police officer's job is a difficult job. And a lot of times they have to make split-second decisions. that may be life or death situations, and sometimes they may have not enough time to adequately process the information that's before them. But going back, because you do have a fundamental understanding of criminal law, civil rights, do police officers have an obligation, and when someone does not have a weapon, in terms of using non-deadly force?
Again, it's a judgment call, but I mean, the case law establishes that when someone's not a lethal threat, that officers aren't entitled to use deadly force. In this situation, like we said before, most situations they have a lot of variables that is really unclear. There aren't too many cases that are quite as clear as Laquan McDonald is, where you have an officer who's a ways away, where you have other officers at the scene that have him contained, where he's walking away from the officer at the time that the officer chooses to fire. A lot of situations aren't quite that clear cut, but in this case, even the other officers gave their testimony in trial, in fact, that they didn't feel that Laquan was a threat. And they had been there already, they had been observing him. They were closer than Officer Van Dyke was. So there are situations in which judgment calls they have to be made, but this situation was pretty clear cut.
Attorney Akbar, let's a couple of scenarios. In terms of obligations of police officer, taking consideration someone fleeing, taking consideration their surroundings, what is the general principle in terms of pursuing someone in traffic with a police officer? I.e., they're chasing someone that may be suspected in committing a crime. Is there any type of protocol that they should be using?
I mean, the Chicago Police Department, they have protocols in place as far as, of course, they still have some latitude for individual judgment, but they have protocols in place as to when officers should pursue a suspect, when they shouldn't. They have to consider whether or not certain situations may pose a risk to other people and how severe the threat is. I mean, if they're chasing somebody that just murdered a couple of people, maybe the threat is different than somebody who stole some money from somewhere. It's a different evaluation, a different calculus. And they also have to consider where they are. If they're in a crowded intersection, they're on a busy street, but there are a lot of other cars. They may have a little bit less latitude than in a situation where it's late at night and there are no other vehicles on the road, or if they're on a less busy street.
Because, Attorney Akbar, we've had some occasions in terms of police officers getting in accidents where they're pursuing someone. An argument could be made that perhaps, again, we're not second-guessing anyone, that perhaps maybe they should have just called ahead in hopes that another police officer down the way could apprehend them.
And that is a part of what they're required to do in those situations. They have to call and get back up and try to cordon off the suspect. And officers in that situation, under the law, they do have more latitude than a regular driver would have. Whereas a regular driver is held to a reasonable degree of care. Basically, you have to exercise reasonable care under the circumstances. An officer who's in pursuit, who has his lights on, his sirens on, they have to be shown to be reckless and have a willful disregard for somebody's rights before they can be held liable. So that means functionally, in the course of a pursuit, and the officer has his lights on, he's chasing somebody, and he's supposed to be chasing that person. He can't be held liable in the course of causing any accidents when he's making a lawful pursuit.
Very good. Again, the number is 312-738-1060, 312-738-1060. Please call us, because we're trying to give you some practical information. Now, Attorney Akbar, we've had a couple. We want to help some people. Now, what is the distinction of someone having a permit, and correct me if I'm using wrong terminology, a permit to have a weapon, as opposed to having a permit to have a weapon on themselves?
Okay.
Can you explain that distinction?
Yeah. I get what you're saying as far as having a concealed carry permit, as far as having a gun ownership permit.
Correct.
A concealed carry permit is a much broader permit as far as it allows you to take your firearm and carry it just about everywhere, except places that are specifically off limits, as far as close to schools and government buildings, things of that nature. Whereas you can have a permit to own a gun and have it in your home and be able to use it then, but you can't take that gun elsewhere. You can't have it and transport it and walk around with it in the same way that you can with a concealed carry permit. But as I mentioned, concealed carry permits, they have their issues too, as far as you may not know that you're carrying it somewhere that you're not permitted to carry it.
Attorney Akbar, several months ago, we had the incident, I believe, on 71st Street in the South Shore area. And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the individual that was unfortunately killed had a permit to own a weapon, but did not have a permit to walk around with the weapon, conceal carry.
Right.
And I think, again, you helped me, I think the problem was this, the police officer stopped him, and then I think, correct me, did he make a sudden move or something?
To be honest, I don't really remember the particulars of that situation, but I do know, and that's one of the issues with concealed carry holders, is that you can be mistakenly identified, or let's say you have an officer who sees that you have a gun and they react without considering the fact that you're a lawful carrier.
Hold that point, 'cause I want to come back to it. Caller, are you there?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Your question, please.
A question about, as it pertains to the verdict, the definition of official misconduct, and whether or not anybody's looking into maybe changing whatever that definition is.
And sir, thank you for calling in. I appreciate it. I think what you're referring to, and he's referring to the fact that Officer Van Dyke was convicted of a second-degree murder charge, 16 aggravated battery charges for each shot fired, and then he was acquitted of a final charge of official misconduct. And don't hold me to this. I can't recall the official book definition of it right now, but I think that the reasoning behind the official misconduct charge was the fact that he abused his authority as an officer and acted against his mandates, which I'm not sure if it's an appropriate charge in the situation, and I'm not, and perhaps that's the reason that he wasn't convicted on it. That charge is typically used in different situations where an officer abuses their authority. Let's say the officer does something that doesn't have to do with enforcing the law. They take some money from someone or they steal something of that nature, as opposed to an officer who's on duty but makes a horrible decision. Arguably, you could say that that's not really within the gambit of misconduct, in that it wasn't intentional. I think that's the distinguishing factor. It has to be intentional, the officer's acts.
Very good. We have another caller. Caller, are you there?
Yes.
Your question, please.
Yeah, thanks for taking this call. I just wanted to know, say I'm driving today, anywhere. If a police stop me for whatever the reason, and I know I haven't did anything, but because he's the police, he can't stop me, what is the procedure that I'm supposed to follow simply because I have been stopped? And the reason why I'm asking that is because I think a lot of people, it's sad to say, are getting killed because if I know I haven't did anything, I'm scared of you. Something is getting ready to happen, especially if I know I haven't did anything. But if I knew what the procedures were, or if there were procedures in place, I think a lot of people would have a different mindset when the police stop them.
Right.
You kind of understand what I'm trying to ask?
Excellent question.
That's a great question, and that's what I was getting at earlier. What we've talked about in the Cook County Bar Association. In the last few years, maybe it just seems as though there's a lot more incidents of somebody reaching for a wallet or somebody going for insurance information or whatever the case may be, and the officer saying, I was scared. There's a miscommunication somewhere. Hopefully, you want to think it's not just an intentional killing. And that's why we developed a how-to where you want to stop and you want to make sure the focus of the encounter is getting out safely. You want to make sure that you're not conveying a threat to the officer. That's why you have your hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. You're turning your car off. You're rolling the window down. You're turning the light on so the officer can see in the vehicle and see. You just want to, see what the officer wants. You just want to comply with the stop and move on. As far as any civil rights violations that may happen if you feel that the officer is harassing you or he was treating you unfairly, that's something that you have to address at a later date. So that's secondary to any concern about your life and responding in a way that you can get away from the accident safely. If you have those concerns, any civil rights violation concerns, you can address those later. But at the scene of the accident, you want to make sure that your hands are visible, that the officer can see in the vehicle so that there is no question about where your hands were if you're reaching for anything.
Very good. Very good. Practical information. Caller, are you there? Caller, are you there?
Yes?
Your question, please.
Yeah. My question is, where would where would this officer be serving his time in reference to this Van Dyke this verdict? And I'm asking that because sometimes when officers of the law are convicted of crime, sometimes they're not actually going to facilities where they have an opportunity to reflect on what's going on. They may just be removed from society, but they're not necessarily in a place where the kind of reform that he needs is going to take place.
Attorney Akbar?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm not sure of the exact facility. We won't know that. But a lot of what determines where someone goes and when they're convicted of a crime depends on whether or not it's a federal charge or a state level charge. If it's a state level charge, he'll be in a state penitentiary in Illinois. If it's a federal charge, he could be at a federal prison in another state even though we have federal prisons in the area. So that will probably determine it. As far as what level of confinement, that's a decision that the judge has to make, and based upon his sentencing and the factors. Obviously, he's been convicted of a serious crime, about as serious as it can get. So you would expect that he wouldn't be put into a low security facility. He would be in a significant confinement. But as far as which facility exactly, I couldn't say.
Very good. Attorney Akbar, I'm going to bring you back to the point you were discussing. What do you do? Because again, there's a problem in terms of the distinction, in my mind,
Sure.
of having a permit to own a weapon and the concealed carry. Now, do you have some practical advice for individuals that maybe unfortunately have a permit to own a gun, but for whatever reason have the weapon with them outside of their home and they're stopped by the police? Any practical advice on that?
One thing that we always recommend is in situations like that is you want to convey to the officer, first off, you want to convey that you're in compliance, your hands on the wheel. You're saying, officer, how can I help you? And he says, I stopped you for a traffic violation. You can say, I will provide you my information, officer. I'll give you my insurance. I'll give you my license. But I also need to let you know, officer, I am a concealed carry permit holder and I do have my weapon in my vehicle. In which case he may ask you to get out of the vehicle. He may ask you, where's the weapon? But at least that communicates to him in that state that you're complying. You just want to give him your license. You just want to give him your information. That indicates to the officer, look, I don't want any issues, but I'm trying to help you out and make sure that there are no further issues by letting you know that there's a weapon in the vehicle so you don't encounter it, so you don't see it out the corner of your eye and become surprised, and then, an accident or tragedy could happen.
That is sound advice. Again, stay on the same point, Attorney Akbar. What if you're outside the vehicle? And again, we're not second guessing anybody, but you're stopped by the police. Again, if you're outside the vehicle, you're walking down the street and the police stop you, in terms of trying to make them feel comfortable and making them aware that you have a weapon.
Once again, if you're stopped and the situation is a little bit different, if you're outside of your vehicle and you're stopped, let's say an officer wants to talk to you, you're walking down the street, hey, come over here, I want to talk to you for a second, can I ask you a few questions? The officer, it may be an interview to where the officer just wants to ask you a few questions, or he may suspect that you've committed a crime and he says, come here, I want to pat you down and search you. You fit the description of somebody who's robbed a bank a half block away. In that situation, I think if you're going to be patted down, you should definitely inform the officer. Just, officer, before you pat me down, you should know I'm a legal concealed carry holder. I have a legal permit to carry a weapon, and I have my weapon on me. Again, you just want to alleviate and make sure that there's no situation to where the officer can panic and say, I didn't know, or he moved, he twitched, and I didn't know, and I saw the gun and I fired. That's the theme of it all. Any police interaction where there's a gun involved. You definitely just want to let the officer know what the situation is.
Attorney Akbar, again, stay on the same point. Same scenario. You don't have a concealed weapon, and you do have a weapon on you because, again, you have a permit and you, for whatever reason, you had the weapon outside of the house.
Okay.
Any practical advice on that? Because, again, the theme of it is not to get hurt, correct? That is the number one objective, to come from this police encounter in one piece. As Attorney Akbar said, if you have a civil rights violation, the first thing is to file that civil rights
Exactly
case.
Right. In that situation, you got obviously a bit of a problem because you have your weapon and it's not contained in a carrying container as though you just bought it from the gun store and you're taking it in the house, or you're taking it out of your house and taking it to somebody else's house to transport it. If you have the gun on you, then you have a legal issue. But the point remains the same. You have an issue in the fact that you have a gun, and the officer may, feel a certain type of way about that. He may have a response. It may not be a fair response, but you have to consider that response then and there. With regards to that situation, you still want to inform the officer that you have a gun, and you may want to retain an attorney. You should definitely retain an attorney. If the officer questions you, if he takes you in, he may question you about where you're taking the gun. Are you on your way somewhere? Do you always carry the gun? In that case, I would advise that you retain an attorney, even if you're placed under arrest for having that gun on you.
Good advice, Attorney Akbar. Attorney Akbar, again, we're trying to give our viewers practical information. Explain to our viewers the Miranda in terms of what you're obligated for the police to tell you if you're being arrested.
Okay. So, and everybody's heard it. It's a pretty broad statement. Now, Miranda warnings are the warnings that the officer, you commonly hear it. You have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and maybe will be used against you in a court of law. You have a right to an attorney. That's a disclaimer that the officers must tell you in the course of an arrest. They have to tell you that they place you under arrest so that you can be informed of your rights to not say anything, to your right to retain an attorney before speaking with the police. What that does, though, there's a common misconception that the officer's failure to tell you your Miranda rights prevents you from being convicted. Let's say you're caught with some drugs and the officer doesn't give you Miranda rights and he takes you in and he arrests you. The fact that he didn't give you the Miranda rights doesn't prevent you from going to jail or getting convicted for possession of drugs, whatever it is. What it is that the Miranda rights are a protection from the police using information that's gained later on if they talk to you, because you may not have known that you didn't have to talk to them. So later on, if they take you in an interrogation room and you confess to something and they didn't read you your Miranda rights, that confession that you gave or the statements that you gave could be ruled inadmissible in court later on. But it is not a blanket prohibition from you being prosecuted or charged with any crime. Even if they fail to give it, if there's other evidence that they can still use that evidence. The case doesn't get tossed out automatically.
Attorney Akbar, again, we want to give practical information. What is your advice to someone who has been arrested in terms of, lack of a better term, keeping their mouth shut until they get counsel?
I'll put it this way. It is always, I can't think of a single situation that is better to talk and have a conversation with the police when you're under arrest than to give an attorney. There's nothing that you're going to say is going to benefit you. There's no guarantees. There's nothing that talking at that point in time will do to benefit you. You can always get an attorney, and if your attorney advises you so, you can talk later. There's no such thing that prevents you from talking to the police later on as opposed to the first 30 seconds after you're taken in. So you always want to get an attorney if you're charged with any crime. Always.
So in other words, you can keep your mouth shut. Is
Right.
that correct?
And you don't have to be rude about it. You don't have to be belligerent, but you can say, "Officer, I'd rather not speak right now. I'd like to have an attorney, please." And that is the conversation. They can't interrogate you any further at that point. Anything, and they know that they can't interrogate you further because anything they get from you at that point, any information may not be admissible in court. So you definitely want to just convey it to the police or whoever's questioning you. At this point, I just like an attorney. You're not obligated to say anything else.
Very good. Attorney Akbar, we have approximately a minute. Again, we can't solve all the world's problems today, but we're certainly going to try to put a dent in it. Is that
That's
fair?
right.
We're going to certainly try to put a dent in it. Your scenario on what's going on in terms of the interaction between the police officers and the citizens.
I think the world of video cameras and cell phones and this advanced camera footage has shown us practices that have been going on for a while, and that's a great thing. It's difficult to see. It's heartbreaking to see some of these abuses come to light, but they're here, and fortunately, we're doing our best to deal with it. With the Cook County Bar Association, I'm with the Bar Association in several different capacities. We definitely are here to serve the community. We provide a number of different avenues of relief. We have a civil rights community that tries to address civil rights concerns. We have a lawyer referral service for people who need representation and they don't have it. So we want you to understand that we exist, we're here, and we work for you. We want to work with you and help the community. So we implore you, we encourage you to reach out to the Cook County Bar Association for any legal needs that you may have, any questions you may have, for anything at all. Any way that we can be of assistance, we're glad to help. But we want the community at large to understand that the Cook County Bar Association is here and we're on your side.
Attorney Akbar, it's been a pleasure. You're a young superstar. I encourage you to keep on going.
Thank you, sir.
Keep on
Appreciate it.
going. God bless you all. We'll be back the same time next week.